July 22nd, 1944. The Mount Washington Hotel in Bretton Woods, New Hampshire. John Maynard Keynes, widely regarded as the most brilliant economist of his era, is fighting a battle he already knows he cannot win. For 3 weeks, he has remained inside this luxurious resort, negotiating while suffering from the heart disease that will take his life only 2 years later. And he understands exactly what is unfolding before him. Britain is not participating in negotiations at Bretton Woods as an equal power. Britain is accepting terms. Those terms are being written by the United States. America controls the conference. The international monetary framework emerging from this gathering will be designed around American priorities, just as the global system once revolved around British interests during the 150 years when sterling served as the world's reserve currency and London stood at the center of global finance. Keynes presents a different vision. He advocates for a truly international reserve currency, one tied to no individual nation and capable of supporting a more balanced financial order. The American delegation refuses the proposal. A balanced arrangement is not what they require. The United States possesses 2/3 of the world's gold reserves, the most productive industrial economy on the planet, and military forces deployed across Europe. That level of leverage makes an equal negotiation impossible. On July 22, 1944, the dollar becomes the world's reserve currency. On that same day, sterling begins a gradual march toward irrelevance. The process that eventually weakened the pound did not arrive through a dramatic collapse. It unfolded over 3 decades. The decline was slow, managed, and occasionally interrupted. Each stage appeared stable for a time until another crisis stripped away another piece of sterling's global role. When Britain required an IMF bailout in 1976, it did not shock anyone who had been paying attention to the numbers. It was simply the formal recognition of a path that had been set in motion the moment Keynes left Bretton Woods after losing the debate. Today, the dollar occupies a position comparable to 1944 rather than 1976. Not yet. But the same mechanism that carried sterling from Bretton Woods to the IMF is now operating within the dollar system with remarkable structural similarity. That should concern anyone whose savings are denominated in dollars. To understand what sterling surrendered between 1944 and 1976, it is necessary to understand what reserve currency status actually means, and why preserving it becomes difficult once the conditions that created it begin to change. Sterling did not become the world's reserve currency because of a single treaty or political decision. It emerged from a century of economic reality. In 1820, Britain was the world's largest creditor nation. It was also the leading manufacturing power and the economy, generating trade surpluses that provided authentic international support for its currency. When nations held pounds, they were holding claims against the most productive economy on earth. Gold convertibility was simply the formal representation of a deeper economic truth. The First World War changed that reality. Britain sold approximately 1/4 of its overseas investments to finance the conflict. It borrowed $4.7 billion from the United States, transforming itself from the world's leading creditor into America's largest debtor. Its manufacturing sector spent 4 years focused on wartime production. The trade surpluses that once supported sterling gave way to continuing deficits. Yet the pound remained the dominant reserve currency for another 3 decades. That persistence did not exist because economic conditions still justified it. It survived because institutions, networks, and financial systems built during a century of genuine British dominance possessed tremendous momentum. Nations did not abandon reserve currencies quickly because replacing existing infrastructure carried enormous costs. This gap became Britain's greatest vulnerability. The global role of sterling continued long after the economic foundations that originally supported it had weakened. The pound remained at the heart of international finance, not because Britain was still the world's leading creditor and manufacturer, but because dismantling the existing system seemed more expensive in the short term than preserving it. With every passing year that the distance between sterling's worldwide role and Britain's true economic condition remained unresolved, the eventual correction became more severe. The pattern of the pound's decline provides the template, and the dollar now sits on that path. The first stage was the gradual withdrawal from empire. During the late 1940s and throughout the 1950s, Britain attempted to preserve the international military and political obligations expected of a reserve currency power while operating with the finances of a nation that had exhausted its resources winning a war. The sterling area depended on Britain maintaining confidence in the currency, even as Britain's own position weakened. The first clear warning appeared during the convertibility crisis of 1947. Under the terms attached to the 1946 Anglo-American loan, Britain agreed that sterling could be exchanged for dollars whenever requested. Within only 5 weeks, claims for dollars against sterling reserves reached $700 million each week. The entire loan was effectively consumed during a single summer. Convertibility was halted. The international community had now learned that support behind sterling came with conditions. The second stage arrived at Suez in 1956. Britain and France launched an invasion of Egypt in an effort to regain control of the Suez Canal. The administration of Dwight Eisenhower warned that it could sell American sterling holdings. Such a move would have immediately driven the pound into collapse. Britain backed down, not because of battlefield pressure, because the United States possessed enough sterling to break the currency. The moment a reserve currency nation can be pressured through its own money, the core function of that currency as a store of value free from political coercion suffers permanent damage. The third stage came with the devaluation of 1967. Sterling fell from $2.80 to $2.40. That represented a 14% reduction. Harold Wilson famously argued that a pound in someone's pocket remained a pound. It did not. The devaluation officially recognized that the previous exchange rate could no longer be sustained. The fourth stage arrived in 1976. Britain turned to the IMF. The currency that had stood as the world's leading reserve asset for 150 years, the same currency that helped finance the Industrial Revolution and supported 2 world wars, was now borrowing from an institution it had helped establish because it could no longer fund its obligations at rates markets considered credible. This is the crucial point. Every phase was preceded by a period when officials insisted the currency remained strong and that difficulties were under control. Each phase began when an event exposed the difference between official assurances and financial reality. That difference had always existed. The triggering events merely removed the cover. This is where the dollar stands today and why the comparison is structural rather than symbolic. For sterling, the Bretton Woods moment occurred in 1944. That was the point when the separation between the pound's global role and its underlying support could first be measured in a formal way. For the dollar, the equivalent moment is not 1944. It is 2024. The Moody's downgrade in November 2024 marked the moment when the world's most trusted credit rating institution formally acknowledged that the gap between the dollar's reserve currency position and the fiscal direction of the United States could be measured. American debt has reached $36 trillion. That equals 124% of GDP. Annual interest expenses are now larger than the entire defense budget. The structural deficit stands at $2 trillion even under normal economic conditions. The dollar's share of worldwide foreign exchange reserves has fallen from approximately 72% in 2001 to roughly 58% today. That is a decline of 14 percentage points within a single generation. For 5 consecutive years, central banks have purchased gold at record levels. The BRICS payment network now handles billions of dollars in trade every month. The institutional momentum supporting the dollar remains extremely powerful, yet the distance between that momentum and the underlying arithmetic continues to widen. This resembles sterling in 1947, not 1976. The dollar's international role remains operational and intact. The economic foundations that once justified that position, however, have weakened substantially. The institutional framework that supports the dollar's position remains powerful, but that framework is operating on borrowed time. The dollar has not yet experienced its equivalent of the 1947 convertibility crisis. No event has yet emerged in which claims against American reserves accelerate faster than the Treasury can effectively manage under combined financial and geopolitical pressure. Likewise, the dollar has not yet faced its own Suez moment. The day has not arrived when another government can credibly threaten to unload Treasury holdings in order to force a change in American foreign policy. That threshold has not been crossed. Yet the conditions required for both scenarios are gradually taking shape, not through planning, not through conspiracy, through simple arithmetic. A reserve currency nation is running annual deficits of $2 trillion while its creditors slowly, logically, and steadily reduce their exposure. There's another factor that separates the dollar situation from sterling's experience, and not in a comforting way. Britain's decline unfolded over 3 decades. Its effects were largely contained within Britain itself. The loss of reserve currency status weakened British living standards, limited foreign policy options, and forced political adjustments that were difficult but still manageable within an operating democratic system. The dollar occupies a different position. It serves as the reserve currency for the entire international financial structure. Dollar-denominated bond markets provide collateral supporting trillions of dollars in transactions around the world. The dollar's role extends beyond American prosperity. It functions as core infrastructure for modern trade and finance. A shift away from dollar supremacy would not be merely a British-style national challenge. It would represent a worldwide reconstruction of financial architecture on a scale without a modern comparison. Sterling's decline imposed costs on Britain. An equivalent decline in the dollar would create disruption across every nation holding dollar reserves, pricing exports in dollars, or repaying debt denominated in dollars. That includes much of the world. John Maynard Keynes recognized in 1944 that the system established at Bretton Woods relied too heavily on the fiscal discipline of a single nation to remain permanently stable. He argued for a more balanced arrangement. His proposal was rejected because the United States possessed the leverage necessary to reject it. What Keynes identified was the mechanism now operating beneath the surface. Any reserve currency tied to the fiscal position of one country will eventually reach a point where that position no longer fully supports its global role. When the transition begins, the disruption reflects how deeply global financial infrastructure has been built around that currency. Empires do not collapse overnight. Sterling did not disappear in a single moment. Its decline stretched across 3 decades. Each stage appeared stable for a time. Each phase consumed another layer of confidence until little remained. Keynes departed Bretton Woods after losing what may have been the most significant economic debate of the 20th century. He understood the consequences. He understood exactly what had been lost. 2 years later, he died after spending his final months negotiating the Anglo-American loan that bound Britain more tightly into a dollar-centered system shaped by American terms. The transition he had attempted to avoid was already in motion. Nothing remained capable of stopping it. The dollar's transition is unfolding in a similar fashion to sterling's position in 1944. Those studying the numbers can see it. Those focused only on headlines often cannot. The institutional momentum remains real. The distance between that momentum and the underlying arithmetic is real as well. And that distance expands each quarter that structural deficits continue, reserve currency share declines, and central bank gold purchases accelerate. The story is not about a sudden collapse. It is about a process that begins long before most people recognize it. If this analysis gave you a new perspective, share your thoughts and continue following the larger trends shaping the global financial system before they become tomorrow's headlines.